Good evening, I'm Jim Whaley. It is indeed a pleasure tonight on Cinema Showcase to have as my guest one of America's best and best-known writers, Mr. Erskine Caldwell. His books have been read and discussed for the past 40 years, and several of them have been made into immensely popular films, including God's Little Acre and Tobacco Road. One of his finest works has just been reprinted. It's called You Have Seen Their Faces, done in collaboration with Margaret Burke White. We'll be talking about that book tonight, among other things, so join me as I talk with Erskine Caldwell on Cinema Showcase. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining Cinema Showcase tonight. And Mr. Caldwell, thank you very much for coming.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Jim?
You Have Seen Their Faces is, I think, one of the most striking books of its kind I have ever seen. Why, after so many years, has it been reprinted?
I really don't know. I can make a few guesses, I suppose, because I had nothing to do with it until I was informed that a publisher wanted to reprint it. There's not the original publisher by any means. This is another set of people completely, because it was originally done 1937, and it was done then in two editions, a hardcover edition, and several months later a paperback edition, and of course that was many years ago. Now this present operation was started out with the Arno Press. Now the Arno Press is a subsidiary of the New York Times organization, and they wanted to do a library edition of this book for the public library, for school libraries and classwork and so forth. So it was projected originally as sort of a restricted type of publication for a specific purpose and public. Now at that time I agreed to it, and we signed a contract and so forth, and then just a few weeks later they came back and said they wanted to do a paperback edition also. And that was let out to another publisher, which is called Derby Books. So there are two editions of this particular book at this time, the Arno Press edition, hardcover, and the Derby Books, which is the paper cover edition. And I think the reason that it was being done, well, there may be more than one reason, but one reason is the fact that it might have something to do with the fact that the book was previously written and published during the Great Depression in the 1930s. And recently, in the past few weeks, few months and years, we've heard the expression used that we are in a recession, economic recession, I think it's called. Well, this might have some reference to the fact that it might have some meaning at this time to look back to see what life was really like when there was a Great Depression in this country, particularly in the South. In the South, unfortunately, I suppose you might say, was had the greatest depression of all, because it was a cotton empire. People lived with cotton, they ate cotton, they slept with cotton. The whole South was a cotton empire. And that brought about the downfall of the economic system as far as the South was concerned, because right after that, the agricultural revolution took place and the cotton disappeared, except for the great plantations along the Mississippi River Valley. And then it moved westward into Texas, and then went as far into New Mexico, Arizona, and California. So most of the cotton now is grown elsewhere, out of the South. So this is sort of a historical document, I suppose.
All right, how did the project originate back in 1937? Why did you decide to do it as a photographic essay, more or less?
Well, because that was the tempo of the times. The times were real tough for people. People were hungry. People were in bread lines in the cities. The business was stagnant. And people were doing a great hardship, and what I wanted to do was to find the actual form of this Great Depression. What was it like to be in it? And Margaret Burke White had the same idea, that she wanted to photograph the thing, And so we put the two ideas together. My idea is to write about it and she to do the photography. So we collaborated with that in mind, that we wanted to show what the poverty was and how it looked on people's faces and in their living conditions and so forth.
All right, what was the strongest impression you came away with after what I assume was months of
well, it was
the
fact that that the people were enduring maybe the greatest hardship of American life up until that time, and it may never repeat itself. It may never be that hard again for the human spirit to endure. And what came out of it is the fact that people were able to survive in spite of the hunger, in spite of the housing, in spite of the unemployment and so forth. The spirit was not broken. The spirit survived. So I think it made the South a much stronger region, because after enduring this hardship, I think it strengthened the personality and the outlook and the ambitions of people in the South.
I wonder if perhaps that's one of the reasons the South has been, in literature, certainly a more colorful region than any other part of this country. Perhaps the South has endured more. Is that one of the reasons?
Well, of course, they say the reason so many people write about the South, and so why is there such a prolific output of Southern writing, is the fact that Southerners really don't know anything except can't do anything much except tell stories. So instead of working at some worthwhile project like building something or making something or doing something, they just sit down and tell stories to each other. And so the writers come along and pick up the same idea. Well, if there must so many stories in existence, you might as well write them up in a book.
And there have been, well, my goodness, there have been a preponderance of our greatest writers who have come from the South.
Well, yeah, and of course, there might be other reasons than what I said. I'm just talking out of my top of my head. I don't know why people write so much about the South, but it is interesting to me.
Sure. Well, it's interesting.
I'd much rather write a story about the South if I could than any other region. I've written about other regions of the country, New England and so forth, and up and down the Mississippi Valley. But the Deep South, to me, is the gold mine for writing.
One of the things the essays in this book, I think, argued for was a government commission to investigate the dilapidated agricultural system of the South. Did anything good come out of that?
Well, I don't know that it did. Of course, the government did enter into existence of people's lives to some extent, and then there was so much disagreement about the government meddling in people's lives that there was a lot of controversy going on at one time about should the government investigate anything? Should it just stay away and let people alone? Well, I think one thing that came out of the whole Depression was the so-called Writers' Project, the public works programs and so forth, those things, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that came out of that and gave people jobs raking leaves. That's about all they did, they say, is rake up leaves on the street. But at least they gave people something to do, and that was a government project. And I suppose the soil conservation originated then, because soil was being eroded, washed away, and uncared for. So right now there are many soil conservation projects that are administered by the government. So that's a very important thing. So that's something that happened.
Yeah. What was the general reaction to the book when it came out?
Well, I don't think many people liked to see it depicted as it was. Because it was right on the poverty level, and of course everybody was not in the same fix. There were people who were affluent in bad times like that, people who had enough to eat. For example, one of the comments that were made at one time, right in Atlanta, was when Mrs. Roosevelt came down to Atlanta on the way to Warm Springs, I suppose, but stopped in Atlanta, and someone asked her what she was going to do to help the people in the South in that economic distress, and she said, I'm going to see that everybody has shoes to wear. Well, people in Atlanta were wearing shoes, but the people who without shoes were way out of sight in the country, so no one knew exactly what she was talking about in Atlanta. Bring shoes for people in Atlanta to wear.
That's right. That's right. One of the reviews, in fact, of the book, I think it was in Southern Review, accused you of turning state's evidence or something, and said, how could a Southerner write such things?
Oh, well, I've had a lot of comments like that made, yes, that I'm a communist and a socialist and everything else, a single taxer and everything you can think of. I've had all those comments made, but they really don't bother me because I know what I am, and I'm not making any excuses for what I write and as a writer. And the fact that I might have affronted somebody or turned against something doesn't mean a thing to me, because I was only reporting what I thought I was finding, and for the good of the subject I was working with.
Why do you think, though, you touched on this, why do you think Southerners in particular were so enraged?
Well, of course, people have pride, and just like if you criticize someone's dress, the kind of clothes he was wearing or she was wearing or something, well, a person doesn't like that personal criticism, I suppose, and so Southerners have been pretty touchy. I suppose maybe for the fact that maybe the South felt that it was a little bit inferior in some respects to the North or to the people out of the South, and that they became affronted if you criticized them in any way. That's a trait, and there might be some good reason for it.
Well, there almost seems to be a dichotomy there. I think half the people who are not from the South feel that it's all like Gone with the Wind, and the other half feels that it's you know, on the poverty level. So you really have quite a mixture.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
But what changes have occurred since the book was written?
What has occurred?
Have any changes occurred in the South? I mean, if there were another Great Depression, would the South suffer as much?
Well, I don't think so, because of the diversification that has happened in the South. You see, the plantation system was supplanted by the sharecropper system. The sharecropper system was supplanted by the mechanization of farming, and then farming itself had become so specialized that the South does not depend upon the agricultural output of the South for its economic life. And the industrialization of the South, I think, has overcome all the disadvantages of the old agricultural empire, so that there's a mixture of everything going on, which is more conducive to a stable economy. So I think the South is very well stabilized at the present time.
Yeah, good. Let's talk for just a minute about your collaboration in general with Margaret Burke White. You did what, 3 other books with her?
Well, we did a book that more or less covered America. The title of the book is Say Is This the USA? And that was a book about just life in general, not any specific subject, except American life. What is it like in Utah or California or New York or Illinois and so forth. And that was a sort of a general subject covered with my part. The text that I did had to do with sketches about isolated, maybe little incidents, and had nothing to do with the photography. The photography was separate completely. It told its own story. Yeah. So the two were combined to make this one book. And then that was the second book. And then the one other book was a series of sketches and photographs done in Czechoslovakia just prior to the Hitler invasion. And this was sort of the last gasp of freedom for the people of Czechoslovakia. And what we tried to do was to show that the freedom of life just prior to the being taken over by the Nazi regime. So that was called North of the Danube. Then the fourth book was a book about Russia during the war. I was a correspondent there for newspapers and magazines, and Margaret Burke White was a photographer for Life magazine. And what we did, I combined, I used my reportage selection of things I had written for magazines and newspapers, and she contributed the photographs that she had done during Moscow under siege and at the front and so forth. So that was called Russia at War.
All right, what was your method of working with her? Would she take all the photographs and then submit them to you, or would you discuss what was to be taken?
Everything was independent. In other words, I would do what I wanted to do as writing. We'd take a subject. The subject would be Czechoslovakia, for example. So I would have ideas about what I wanted to do, and she'd be eye for the photography. And it might overlap. There might not be any connection whatsoever, but it was a composite that two ideas going together, one in words and one in pictures, and this composite made the book.
I would imagine, though, that kind of a photographic essay book would be kind of a tricky thing, or it could be, in less capable hands, because you don't want to run the risk of the caption destroying or overemphasizing what's in the photo. So.
Well, yes. I guess you sort of have to have confidence in each other as to because if both of you see the same thing, you might get two different angles of that thing. But it would be the same subject. I mean, you look at it from this point over here, that would be the text of it, and over here would be the camera, but you'd see it together, and that would be the focus of it.
Yeah. Of those 4 books you did together, is there one of which you're particularly proud?
Well, I think this. You have seen their faces. That was the first, and it was a very very emotional kind of thing, because these were people who were really suffering. The people in the other books were, you might say, were just ordinary people, ordinary lives, and so forth. But this was these people were hungry, or else they had no jobs, or they were had very poor housing. I mean, you might find some pictures in this book of people with a half house. You know, I think there's one particular photograph there of a house. The whole side of it has been blown away by a tornado in Mississippi. So the people living in a 3-sided house. One side is gone completely.
Yeah.
So that was makes it a very sympathetic project,
indeed,
I think.
Indeed it is. In fact, there's so many photographs in the book that are particularly moving to me. One in particular is near the end of the book. It's of an old woman who obviously has worked very hard all of her life, and the caption reads, "I've done the best I knew how all my life, but it didn't amount to too much in the end," which I think is very moving. Did the fact that you traveled about a good bit as a boy, I know your father was a minister, and you traveled about the South, did that give you a kind of perspective that really helped you in your later writings?
Well, yes, because that's where my understanding and my knowledge, I suppose, originated, because I was constantly moving with my parents, and they were moving constantly every year or so all over the South, and I grew up in that kind of tempo, of style of living, that nothing was permanent. We're here today and tomorrow we'd be somewhere else. But it was a kaleidoscopic idea of life that interested me, because it was always another vista. I know I would have the feeling that this time I'm looking at this, and maybe next time we move we're going to see something different. And there'd be different people. I'd have different friends or playmates, and different school and things of that sort. So everything was constantly in flux, which I still have that feeling. I don't live any one place anymore very long. I'm always wanting to go somewhere else, or travel, or something of sort. So that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. At what point did you know you were going to be a writer, or did you really know that's what you wanted to do?
I don't know. I suppose I had the idea for a long time, because when I was, I think the first time I tried anything like that was when I was in high school in Georgia, and I was, the town where I live is Wren, Georgia, W-R-E-N-S, near Augusta, and there was a weekly newspaper published there, and I would beg the editor and the owner to let me do something, so he let me turn the hand press. It was done by hand. I went in, once a week I'd turn the press to print the paper. Well, that led to the fact that maybe I could contribute something about a dog fight, or something, a house burning down, a fire or something, a wreck. So I'd write a little squib or something, and he'd let me put it in the newspaper. So I guess I just sort of built that up and kept on doing it. So the next project after that was to be a correspondent for daily papers. And so there were papers in Augusta and Savannah and Macon that I would submit news items. Of course, much was happening. In a small town of 1,000 people, what's going to happen every day? Very little. But anyway, I would write something. That the sun didn't shine today until 12 o'clock or something, or it was raining all morning or something. So I kept that up until I could get a column. I was being paid $2 a column by all these papers, Savannah, Macon, and Augusta. You'd paste it up at the end of the month. It was called a paste job. So you'd paste up a column of paper and you'd mail that into the paper. And if you had a whole column, they'd pay you $2. If you had a half column, they'd pay you $1. So I did that through my tenure of education at high school. And then I went away to college for a while and got away from it, but I was writing jokes for Judge magazine, which was a humorous magazine in those days. And I would write jokes, and I think I was being paid $1, or I think it was about $1 a joke, when they would take one. Well, you can't make many jokes, you know. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of luck to write a joke. Well, I was making a few dollars, I suppose, from these humorous magazines, trying to write 2-line jokes. Then I got out of that and got a job on the Atlanta Journal as a cub reporter. And I went to work there. I left school, left college, and went to work there as a cub reporter, and I was being paid $25 a week, which was great money, because I'd never made money like that before in my life. And so I kept that up and kept it up for a while, and after a while, I was trying to write a short story instead. In addition to being a reporter, trying to write short stories. Well, I couldn't get anything published. So I decided that if I were ever going to get any short stories published, I'd better spend all my time at it instead of trying to be a reporter. So I quit and took what money I had saved out of my paychecks, and I decided to go as far as I could with the money I had. So I got as far as the state of Maine. And I dug in there for 7 years trying to write short stories.
Which established writers during your formative years did you really look up to?
Well, I don't know, because what I was reading then were not established writers, but aspiring writers. Those were the days of the so-called little magazine. And a little magazine was a literary project that was organized by people who could not get their stories printed anywhere else, so they start a magazine and print their own stories. And there would be an editorship of it, and half a dozen people would contribute to these magazines. And if you wrote a story and wanted to get in on it, well, you'd submit it to this group of people, and maybe they'd take it, but they wouldn't pay you any money for it. You couldn't pay it, because they had a hard enough time of paying the printer, much less the authors. So that's how the stories I read were you might say, my contemporaries. Not the established writers by any means.
We only have a little amount of time left, and this being Cinema Showcase, I do want to ask you something about some of your books that have been made into films, 3 of them really, Tobacco Road, Claudel English, and God's Little Acre. In general, are you pleased with the screen treatments of your books?
Well, I've come to this conclusion. You see, I have concluded that it's fine to have a film made, but the film should be an original story. For the film. It should not be a film of a book. Because I don't think you can really get the atmosphere and get the whole associated idea, the whole association of a novel into a film. I think it has to be a separate project. So from my point of view, I'd much rather, if it were possible for me, I would write an original story, which I've never done. I would write that in preference to having a novel done. Because once the novel is finished, well, it has its own association. And you try to put it on a film, and you become static. immediately becomes static. It's because it's something that's not the novel itself, it's something different. So I think that I much prefer, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know about other people, other writers, but that's my feeling, that I'd rather write a story directly for film and not have it in print at all.
Mm-hmm. All right, you worked in Hollywood, I know, for several years, in the 40s, I guess. What was that experience like? Was it...
Well, you've probably heard a lot of stories about Hollywood life, the writers and whatnot. I was a junior writer. I went out, and this was in the late 30s, and the first time I went. And I had a job offered me, I don't know why, but I was offered a job by MGM. Mm-hmm. And I had a whale of a salary for those days, and for me, a whale of a salary was $250 a week, mm-hmm. which was a fortune in those days. It was like $2,500 a week. So I was offered this job, and I jumped at it, of course, in those days, because I wasn't surviving otherwise. So I ended up down in New Orleans in a swamp, where they had filming a picture with the title of A Wicked Woman. Mm. And they had a German actress, her first picture, and she didn't speak English any better than I did in those days. I mean, grammatically or accent, anything else. I was a Southern boy with my Southern accent, and she was a German with a German accent. Mm-hmm. But what it amounted to was the fact that that was my first writing project in a film, was to go to Louisiana on location out in the swamp. And we were living in a fishing village on stilts. The water was down, the bayou was down here, mm-hmm. and the stilted bunkhouses up here. Everybody was up here on these stilts. And I was there, I guess, for several weeks, mm-hmm. till they made a lot of background shots and so forth. And then now everybody went back to Hollywood. And the producer called me into his office. He said, well, glad to meet you. Tell me about the film. What do you think of it? I said, well, what film? He said, don't you know what you were doing? I said, I haven't seen any storyline. I don't know what it's all about. I saw him taking some pictures out there of a stand-in. I never saw the actress. I heard about it and heard what she was, her trouble about the English language, but I never saw her. I only saw her stand-in. And the producer said, you mean you haven't written anything? I said, I don't know what to write. He said, well, I'll call you when I need you. And that's the last I ever saw him.
Oh, my goodness. We are totally out of time. I don't know where the half hour is gone. I know I've enjoyed it very much. And I want to invite you to come back again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My thanks to all of you for watching tonight. Until next time, good evening.